One of the most creative and imaginative graphic novel series I've ever read is Jeff Smith's Bone. Maybe the best and simplest way to describe it is it's basically what would happen if 1930s cartoon characters somehow stumbled into Middle-earth. However, that's just scratching the surface of what makes these comics so special. What starts off as a funny little adventure centered on three cousins leaving their town and finding themselves in new territory then becomes this larger tale involving all kinds of creatures, alliances, and the fate of the entire world. A major influence for Jeff Smith were Carl Barks' Scrooge McDuck comics, with him wondering what would happen if Scrooge and the Duck family found themselves in even grander adventures akin to classic epics. The Bone Cousins also bear certain resemblance to the characters from Walt Kelly's Pogo comics, with Smith also citing those as highly influential in his work. There's a fascinating contrast between these cartoony-looking characters interacting with people you might see in a medieval fantasy like Dragonheart. What starts off as an amusing sight gag then evolves into something stronger as the plot develops and the Bones find themselves involved in this larger battle over the valley. Smith successfully builds intrigue as he reveals more about the past, particularly surrounding the character Thorn and the history of her parents and the rat creatures that scour through the valley. He does such a good job of making each of the characters stand out in their own way, with a bone, human, creature, or something else. The main attractions and basically our eyes and ears into this world are the Bone Cousins. They are the first characters we meet and learn a lot of information right along with them. Phone Bone is the main hero, often willing to do the right thing, and fits right into that classic heroic archetype. He has a likable everyman charm to him. Smiley Bone is a lot goofier and often with an optimistic spirit, and then there's Phony Bone, who gets some of the funniest moments. He's very much in the tradition of cartoon characters like Daffy Duck, where he's often doing things for his own greedy gain, and even as he does grow through these adventures, he never loses that lust for the world's riches. It's also hilarious that he's kicked out of Boneville over a botched mayoral campaign. Oh, and that's not just a one-off gag. The story circles back to that in the most ingenious way that does have a major impact on events. Even though we never see Boneville, it becomes fun to picture it in your head and imagine Phony's antics. It's great seeing the interactions between these three, and while there are plenty of portions where they are separated, that connection never goes away. Other major characters in the story are Thorn and her grandmother Rose. Smith does a good job of establishing these two, and their history is a pivotal aspect of the story as we try to figure out exactly what's going on with these two. There's also tavern owner Lucius Down and the relationship he has with Rose. Again, part of the amusement is how these sorts of medieval fantasy characters handle the sudden arrival of these wacky cartoons. They're dealing with this potential serious danger over the valley, all the while Phony is plotting an elaborate get-rich-quick scheme and Smiley is wearing a cow outfit. The villains are compelling too, like the rat creatures that are all over the valley and a cloaked figure who we eventually learn a lot about. I love how Jeff Smith evolves the story, willing to take it to darker places as the story expands, but never forgetting the humor of the Bone Cousins. Although even the Bones, especially Phone, get their serious moments. The rat creatures are quite funny too, adding an additional dimension that allows them to become more than just hungry monsters out to get the heroes. The world building is absolutely remarkable. Jeff Smith came up with so many magical locations and concepts, and even with everything happening in the story, it never becomes too much as he knew when to introduce new elements and characters. We also often know exactly where a character is at any given moment, even as they get more separated. All the little details are cleverly devised, whether we're being told more about the history of the valley, or even something like Phone's favorite book being Moby Dick, although I guess that means Herman Melville exists in this universe. Meanwhile, Smith does not flinch in showing what's at stake in this world. The characters are constantly in danger, often because of the actions of the villains or some magical element that throws a curveball at them. The villainous forces of play are truly diabolical, their plots that try to take everything over, along with their own humorous reactions to the Bones. Smith even ups the violence the further into the story we go, but it fits naturally with the world here, and he impressively balances both the harsh, dramatic tone with the comical elements. I love how the story can go from a comical chase to an epic sword fight with blades swinging. And these characters do get hurt in serious ways, with even the Bones prone to injuries. Over the course of reading the panels, Smith makes you care about a lot of these characters, even minor ones, and that adds the necessary impact and interest in seeing where things go. Before he became a professional comic artist, Jeff Smith was an animator with his own animation studio he co-founded named Character Builders. He mostly worked on commercials and even helped out on the movie Rover Dangerfield. That animation mindset becomes clear in how he draws the panels, as it becomes very easy to picture how the characters move. I can even picture the way the shots are edited in my head and the sound effects and music in the background. The action is that well directed on the page, and there's a beautiful fluidity to the drawings even though they're still. It also makes the emotions hit that much higher as you see how much the characters connect with each other as they face this daunting journey. Smith strikes that balance in knowing when to have dialogue-heavy moments and when to have entire pages with no word bubbles at all, allowing the images to entirely tell the story and the action. I just love looking at every detail in the drawings, with some shots even being filled with things to look at. When Smith draws crowd scenes, like a panel that's filled with animals, or one where the characters are in the middle of a village full of people and creatures, he made sure to include as much as possible, and so you spend several minutes just looking at everything. It adds to the overall strong pacing of the story. By the end of the series, you truly get to know the Bones, their new friends, and the entire history of the Valley, and how it got to this point. And then when you go back and look at the first issues again, it's remarkable how far the story has come. We go from these little white beings trying to figure out the next step, to large-scale battle scenes and magical spells being cast everywhere. There's also a recurring theme about the role fear can have in our decision-making, and how that plays a role in the various factions we see develop. It's a remarkable piece of storytelling on Jeff Smith's part. He spent 13 years writing and drawing Bone from 1991 to 2004, and reading through it, you can really see his imagination ticking as he conceived those 55 issues. The lengthy time he took to devise and publish the entire series was absolutely worth it. Even though you can now read the entire run in full and at your own pace, it must have been quite something for the readers to have to wait for the next issue and spend all those years seeing the tale evolve. By the way, I was first introduced to Bone when Smith allowed the comics to be reprinted in Disney Adventures magazine. Interestingly enough, the person who first recommended the staff take a look at Bone was Marv Wolfman, the famed comics artist who created a significant portion of the Teen Titans team for DC Comics. He was editor of the comics section of Disney Adventures at the time, learned about Bone, fell in love with it, and was able to strike up a deal with Jeff Smith to get them included. They initially appeared in the magazine in 1994, but I'm more familiar with the second run that appeared from 1997 to 1998. I do not know what this Bone comic was, but I was certainly intrigued. Although it should be noted that the drawings were edited slightly with any images of smoking removed and beer changed to soda. However, when Scholastic later reprinted the entire comics run, they kept everything intact, including the violence. With how well Bone would translate to animation, it surprisingly has not been adapted for the screen. The closest have been 2 computer games developed by Telltale Games in the mid-2000s. There have been quite a few attempts to adapt Bone, but they did not pan out for various reasons. Nickelodeon Movies initially bought the rights in 1998 to make a hand-drawn animated movie, with Jeff Smith also signing on to direct. After a few years of working on a script, Smith decided to pull the plug due to his dislike of some of the ideas Nickelodeon was proposing, like including a bunch of modern pop songs. Some of the concept art of this unmade movie has been released, which looks really nice, but if Smith felt the executives wanted to mess with the material too much, I understand his decision. In 2008, Warner Brothers acquired the rights and started work on what would have been a computer animated movie that could possibly spawn a trilogy. It went through a number of scripts and directors, with Mark Osborne, the director of Kung Fu Panda and The Little Prince, attached at one point. Unlike the Nickelodeon version, Smith was not involved with this production, and while he offered praise to the animation tests he was shown, he was less positive about the scripts, and eventually WB decided not to make it. In 2019, it was announced that Netflix now had the rights, with plans to produce an animated series. This was probably the right approach, and for a while it seemed like Bone would finally get the adaptation people were waiting for. Sadly, in 2022, it was revealed that Netflix had decided to cancel the series and no longer move forward with it. Jeff Smith was particularly disappointed about this news, and honestly, I don't understand Netflix's decision. There already exists an audience for this show who have wanted to see the comics adapted. I don't know why Bone is so difficult to adapt in general. The storyboards technically already exist in the comic pages and provide a strong starting point for an animated adaptation. For now, we just have to use our own imaginations. That includes the voices, and reading the comics, I actually do have an easy time picturing the appropriate voice actors in my mind. While I'm sure Smith has his own picks, the voices I heard in my head when reading the comics recently were Charlie Day as Phone Bone, Jack McBrayer as Smiley, John Mulaney as Phony, Chloe Grace Moretz as Thorn, Clancy Brown as Lucius Down, Ron Perlman as the Great Red Dragon, and Giancarlo Esposito as Rockjaw the Mountain Lion. And even though she passed away a few years ago, Cloris Leachman was the voice I heard as Rose. Maybe one day Bone will reach the screens, but for now, Jeff Smith's comics more than breathe plenty of life into this world and its characters. It's an incredible epic adventure with fully realized characters, a ton of imagination, and a terrific blend of cartoon humor and emotional drama. Even with many of his obvious influences, Smith still crafted a unique fantasy all his own that will certainly stand the test of time, and I think Bone deserves to be considered one of the greatest comic books ever created. See you next time.